Um, it's already recording, but another thing I'm going to do, I was thinking about it when I was driving today. I'm going to send you kind of a release, not so much of a release, but something so that you can put your social media in that, so that I can put that in the show notes. Because really, my motivation beyond writing this paper, but when I put it on New Media Lab, I want to drive people to you. I know that in the first season of New Media Lab, I interviewed people from some different places, different, not just podcasts. And I had a couple of people write in and say like, oh my gosh, I ended up selling whatever because they heard New Media Lab. So that's the kind of stuff I want to do. So let's see if we can't draw some people to your show.
Yeah, any bit helps.
Yeah. So you ready?
Yep, absolutely. Go ahead.
Okay. Now I won't I'll add a setup to this thing. So I'm just going to really kind of go through the questions, and then we'll make some additions to the questions as we go along. And I'll try to keep it to about a half hour.
Okay.
All right, let's jump in. Let's start out by give your name of your podcast, and then give me a short description.
Sure. So my podcast is The Lovely Craftians. We are... Oh, hang on. Let me pull up the blurb for it.
Yeah, go ahead.
We are an all-female / female identifying group who plays the tabletop role-playing game Call of Cthulhu.
Okay, wait. I talked over it. So can we just start that again? Yeah. So say the name and then start that description. And we'll get a nice clean thing for the podcast.
Sure. My podcast is The Lovely Craftians. We're an all-female / female identifying group playing the tabletop role-playing game Call of Cthulhu. And for anyone who hasn't played that or heard of it, it's like Dungeons and Dragons, but with mystery and Lovecraftian horrors instead of fantasy. So I write the scenarios and kind of design the gameplay for every time we sit down and record, and then my friends play through it with me. So that's kind of what we do.
Fantastic. When did you start podcasting?
We started podcasting. We started recording in April of this year, and then our first episode launched in late May of this year. So I'm not a super seasoned podcaster, if you will. I'm pretty fresh out of the gate.
Excellent. And so this was your first venture into podcasting?
Yeah. Great.
And how many downloads does your most popular current show? I say it that way because some people have multiple shows.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to reword it when I ask you. How many downloads does your show average per episode?
So we're going to be representing your niche market in that we are a subset of a pretty particular audience base. So right now we're averaging a little over 100 downloads per episode. It varies depending on the time of year, really. If it's a holiday, like Halloween was a big one for us because everybody was doing Halloween specials of everything. So that's what everyone was binging at the time. So I feel like I'm justifying it, but
no, that was a legit answer. And between you and I'll take this out, but 100 per episode is a great start.
Yeah, it's somewhere. And
it really is.
The numbers keep going up month to month, so it's not like we're losing people, which is arguably one of the more important aspects to me. I want people to keep going with it, especially since it is a pretty lengthy season 1, we'll call it. There are quite a few episodes to it, so retention is pretty important.
So the thesis that I have talks about celebrity versus non-celebrity. So there's a couple of questions here that answer them as best you can, however you interpret them.
Mm-hmm.
Are you a celebrity?
Not yet. Maybe someday, but not right now.
Are there any celebrities that are associated with your podcast?
We've got a couple of artists and actresses who are known within their own scenes, but in a more broad, major Hollywood or major celebrity podcasting sense, no, we're pretty new.
Great. Okay. The first few questions, so that you know, usually roll through really fast, and then you talk for like 20 minutes.
Okay.
This question is not pertinent to you. Do you think gaining audience day is the same as when you started? That's when I have people that like, I've got a guy who's been doing it for 10 years.
Oh, wow.
That's a big change.
Yeah.
So we're going to skip question 6. It's not going to make a difference since it's within the year. What are 3 key things that you've done to grow your audience?
That's a good question. Probably the biggest key was getting to know the people who are already in this community, who are already producing podcasts like this. So a lot of it was making friends, and the D&D or role-playing podcast community is incredibly supportive. And we're really lucky that that was the case, because I kind of went into it thinking, oh, it's going to be a total boys club, because that's kind of historically what some of the nerdier ventures have been in the past. And I was honestly surprised at how warm a reception we got. And we quickly made friends there, and that's been the biggest help. And it's not just begging for retweets, it's actually engaging in the community that we wanted to be a part of that has helped us grow the most, because it's word of mouth and it's always great. So that was probably the biggest thing that helped. Luck will play no small part in it either. So we've gotten kind of lucky with some of the people that we've gotten to know who are much bigger than ourselves and have really helped boost us up. We also did a giveaway that was part luck in it as well, because one of the companies that we were using their gear for and we were giving away saw our tweet and retweeted it, and then it was just kind of off to the races from there. So I would attribute at least to those 2 things are probably the biggest influences on our audience currently. And when we went from having no audience to having the small but fervent audience that we do now.
Good answer. So with the giveaway that you did, was that an out-of-pocket giveaway, or did you contact the company, they gave you something, and then that's when the ball got rolling?
No, it was an out-of-pocket one, because we were just getting started. We had maybe 1 or 2 episodes out, and I didn't feel comfortable going to companies who had no idea who I was and saying, hey, can you give us some free stuff to give away? Maybe down the line when we have what I feel is more to offer in terms of audience or exposure, I'd feel a little bit more comfortable doing that. But at that point, I definitely didn't want to overstep my bounds as a new player on the block.
Understandable. So social media is critical to the success of podcasts or new media in general. I'm asking for some advice here. What are 3 key social media practices that you do to build audience?
So, and this is something I read in one of the many social media strategy books that are out there and available, but they said that posting once a day means that you're posting at least 100% more than somebody who isn't. So you don't need to necessarily blast people on social media all the time, but there needs to be some sort of consistency in your presence so that people start to know to look out for you. So that was probably one of the bigger ones, like just to post. And to me, it's important to post something meaningful and not just some random nonsense that doesn't mean anything and contributes nothing to any sort of discussion. It's cool to throw up a meme or something every once in a while, but for the most part, post something that engages your audience. And then knowing which platform to use is a really huge thing too, because it can vary greatly. Our Facebook presence is okay, but it's nowhere near as active and engaged as our Twitter feed is. And I'm sure if I experimented with Instagram, if we got one of our artist friends more involved and she was drawing actively for the podcast, we could post stuff like that. Excuse me. So It's just finding the right medium that makes a world of difference.
And I think you answered the question within your answer, but what are the platforms that you are using actively?
So we actively use Twitter the most. We also have a Facebook page that we basically use probably 70% less than we actually use our Twitter feed. But we also have our Patreon, which that one doesn't get as active either, but it's at least something that we can throw up some extra content on and be like, hey, you should pay for this because we put a lot of effort into it. Here's some extra things that aren't essential to the story, but make it move forward or help you immerse a little bit more. So that one's, I would call that a social media tool, but it's a very different use than the rest of them.
I like how you worded that, though. You should pay for this because you're getting this cool extra content. I think that is a really great way to look at it, because that's what I look at it as, you know? That's really good. Really good. Okay. You started in April, you've grown. I'm going to call this a success. I want to know, what do you think is the secret to your podcast success?
Mostly just having fun with it. I think people can tell when you don't have fun with the project because it doesn't sound as good and it's not as engaging a content. So when you're actually enjoying what you're doing, it makes a world of difference. And this is honestly one of the most time-consuming projects I've ever really taken on, even as just a personal project. I knew what I was getting into, sort of, but until I started editing and then researching different softwares to use that would make this either easier or make it sound better at the start or make it easier for us to connect with our player in New York. Like, it's just taken a lot more effort. So making that effort worthwhile shows in the final product, I think. And then supporting the community that supported us. I think those two alone are accounting for most of it. So I'm just thinking about what I want to say. Sorry.
That's okay. This, you know what? I'm going to edit this into the show. Really, what I'm gathering is the information for my paper. So you take your time.
So, yeah. So supporting the community that supports us, because anybody who succeeds in that community makes that community stronger. So it's just a matter, I feel like we're giving back as much as we're getting, and that exchange has really helped us move forward. So it doesn't matter what sort of podcast community or audience you have, as long as you're engaged in it and supporting the creators who make similar content, because that's just going to foster this spirit of continued support across the board. And that's always useful, I think.
Excellent. We're moving right ahead here. Let's see.
We're powering through these.
What do you think is the next big thing in podcasting?
Oh, that's a good question. So from a micro level, within the role-playing podcast community, we're getting some more oddball games going, which I think is great. So it's not just Dungeons and Dragons being represented. We're seeing a lot more Pathfinder. There's a lot more Warhammer. There's some random ones that people make themselves, which are honestly really fun to listen to because you don't really know the rules and they're just kind of going and hoping for the best. So that's fun. At a more macro level, I keep wondering if we're going to hit a saturation point where there are just too many podcasts out there. But the number of podcasts that I'm subscribed to and that I continuously subscribe to and add to that list would tell me that no, that's absolutely not the case, because there's always going to be something different and something new. I sometimes wonder if it's going to loop back into being video podcasts, like stuff that goes up on YouTube or anything. Twitch might be the next. I don't know. I couldn't put my finger exactly on it yet, but
no, good answers. Actually, for actual play podcasts like what you do, I think that Twitch might be in the future, but I still think that auditory is just as important. I'm not going to put this on your portion of the show, but
it's fine.
Between you and I, that's something that I talk about a lot with my guys because we have actual play podcasts. In fact, I have a Call of Cthulhu show.
Oh, nice.
It's called Masks of Nyarlathotep.
Oh yeah, Nyarlathotep. Yeah.
Yeah. They've been doing actual play for years, so I'm going to connect you to those guys because you'll be like, oh my god.
Yeah.
But we have a few different gaming podcasts, and one thing I've talked about with them is I think that the auditory thing is absolutely a must, but you're going to reach more people if you can find a way to do a couple of things. And one would be like Twitch. You might actually make some money at it if you're consistent, if you're using Twitch properly, and you're playing a game that people are engaged in, So that's something that I've been experimenting with a little bit. Okay, the big question. And you may go, I have no idea. That's okay. How do you monetize your podcast?
So we currently have it monetized through Patreon. It's totally elective. I don't want to bombard people with a bunch of ads yet until there's a point where we can selectively choose, like, yes, I want to support this company, or no, I'm not just going to shill MeUndies because everybody's kind of shilling MeUndies. No shade to them at all. So for right now, it's just the Patreon page. And I think we'll come to a point, and I think we are coming to a point where we need to start talking to some other companies and saying, hey, do you want to sponsor this episode? We'll give you shout outs and we'll get page traffic going for you, whatever we can do to help. We're on the cusp of it. I don't think we're ready yet because, again, it's that I don't feel like we have enough to offer another company just yet in terms of listenership or audience or anything, but it's definitely something I've thought about. I elected not to just automatically monetize it like you would with like YouTube or something, where you turn on AdSense and go to town. One, because we would get demonetized in about 30 seconds. Two, I wanted to be able to have a little bit more control over what ads were going in and what we were essentially shilling for our listeners. And I don't think that I could get that just by saying automatically monetize it, go forth, it's fine. So yeah, I'm being picky, and we're obscure enough that we have the luxury of being picky.
Sure. No, I think that's a good answer. You're the first that has brought up Patreon as a way of monetizing. So I appreciate that because that's something that I actually think could be a game changer if done right. There's a group called Easy Allies that makes a friggin' fortune on there. And I remember I interviewed Taryn from Patreon about how to do it. How does this work? And she's the one that told me about them. And she said, these guys, now granted, they had kind of what I'm saying with this thesis. They had a degree of celebrity because they were guys that wrote for like IGN or something. They broke off. They started their own podcast. But before they did it, they did this Patreon launch. And she said for 30 days leading up to it, they just like bombarded tweets and everything. Hey, we're going to have a Patreon. Hey, we have something new coming. And they launched and they got like, it was ridiculous, like $10,000 a month out of the box.
Man.
I've been doing it for 5 years. I got $36 a month.
Yeah, no.
It's crazy.
Honestly, I feel like most of that's not necessarily true, but I feel like a lot of our donations come from family who are just using pseudonyms, which I'm 100% fine with, but
yeah, it's live omission. They're not going to tell you it's them, and you'll accept it.
Yeah,
all right.
Exactly.
All right, Cassie. Well, you answered all my questions. I don't have anything else this time around because this is a very specific project, but now we are friends. So I will keep you in mind for things, and I love to put people kind of in the jet stream. So when I find things that are going to work for you, I'll make sure I'm like, oh, wait, here's an actual play podcast Cassie needs to be friends with. You're in Chicago, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Did you see you're in Chicago Podcasters Unite? That's how you found it, right?
Yeah.
So did you see when I kept posting all that stuff about the Women in Podcasting Festival?
I did, but we couldn't make it work with our schedules, unfortunately.
Okay, that's totally cool. It was a freaking awesome event, and nobody came. I mean, we had very, very little audience, but everybody that was involved was like, oh my God, do this again, you know? So we're doing that again, but not until 2020, because we want to really market it properly. But we do marathons, we do festivals, we put these things together. So since I know you're in Chicago, I'll just keep sending you the ask. We did masks last year at the Blue Box Cafe. We did our podcast marathon out at the Blue Box Cafe. It's a Doctor Who cafe in Elgin.
Fun.
And it was great. Chris and I got to play. We had never played. Matt and his wife ran they did their show. We did a half-hour version. I shot at a boat and made Cthulhu come out of the water and eat us. It was fantastic. And Matt's like, I kind of set it up that since it was only a half hour that you were going to die. But he goes, you really expedited things when you decided I'm done playing around. It was great. It was so funny because Chris is like, as soon as it happened, he's like, are you kidding me? Like, why did you shoot at the boat? I go, there was a thing on it. He's like, you understand we're playing a Cthulhu game, right? Yeah.
That doesn't stop you.
No, and we got eaten bad. It was great. So, they do work in those respects. And I'm trying actually, I don't know if you do C2E2, but last year I interviewed the guy who runs it, and he was interested in me doing a podcast marathon there. If we end up doing that, I'll let you know, because this is absolutely the type of show I would love to see on there.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So cool. Well, it was great meeting you, Cassie.
You as well.
And you know what? You have me on the phone. I don't know if you know what I do, but if you do, if you have any questions, you got me.
Let me.
You know I own a podcast network, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I knew about. Whoa, what did I do? Okay, I just clicked a button weird, and my world
I still
freaked
hear
out.
you.
No, so I know you. How many podcasts are in your network?
Oh, shit. Currently active, probably about 35 active. That's what's going on right now. But a lot of our stuff is pop culture-y. It'll have seasons. Like, we're doing American Horror Story. That lasts 13 episodes, and then it's done for the year. Mm-hmm. So all said and done, the last time I counted, we're over 100.
Oh, wow.
But some of them are dead at this point, too. But I still keep them on there because, like, we did one about The Killing. My wife and I did one about The Killing. Surprisingly, it still gets pretty good numbers. We don't do anything with it. I don't tweet. I don't do anything. But because it was popular then, it still kind of has legs. Mm-hmm. So I consider it one of our shows. So probably about 100. If you count things that are active that are on hiatus, but they'll be back like within the calendar year, it's probably about 50.
That's still a lot. So
it is a lot.
Are you hosting them, or
you talked about editing? When we started, we had 36 shows. I remember this number. We had 36 shows that first year that were all active, and I was the only one editing.
Oh man, yep. I do not envy you that.
And I got it down from right in the beginning. We're doing like 2 shows. It was taking me like 8 hours to edit a show down, right? And I'm like, oh my God, 8 hours for a half hour. How am I ever going to do this? And then I got really good, and I can do it in like 15 minutes.
Nice.
Yeah. It's all how you treat it. Now yours is a little bit trickier, being actual play. You've got a lot more that you have to kind of listen and cut out. But a lot of the like cleanup stuff and that I eliminate pretty quickly. And I train people when they start with us on how to treat it like a radio show, because with a radio show, you can't go like, hey, pause right there. I'm going to edit this part out, even though it was going out live. And when people start thinking of it like I'm doing a live broadcast, even though it's my wife and I sitting on the couch in our pajamas, it changes a lot.
Yeah. So what was your biggest tip for getting it down from 8 hours to that 15 minutes?
Oh, God. I watched a few YouTube videos on how to edit in Audacity. And I just figured out that, number one, if I had the mindset that it's a live show and I had people learn that, it really saved all the, oh, cut this out, or burp, 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 burp. And you're like, really? You didn't tell me there was a burp? Like, I used to have to listen through everything because like they wouldn't tell me that they swore or that they farted or whatever it was. Once I got that, then I just learned some tricks. Like I just like how you mark the silent area. You give yourself 10 seconds of silence at the beginning, mark that, and then you can remove that noise. I really don't remove any other noise unless there's something that really drastically has to be removed. That's not to say that every time it comes in perfect. I had one maybe a month ago that came in I've never had to edit anything on. And this thing came in and the two tracks, I don't know if you've had this, they didn't sync.
Mm-hmm.
And they were using Skype. So the one track kept kind of like shrinking at places. So I had to really listen and keep matching them up throughout the recording. And one of them, somebody had a lawnmower going off in the background, but it was intermittent. So I had to keep like, okay, there it is. Okay, how do I get this out without it making it sound weird? So that one took probably an hour of editing.
Yeah.
But once I figured out, like, do that thing to get the noise removal, truncate silence. There's just a couple of things I do as far as filters. And then I take that Audacity file, I move it over to GarageBand, and I just, for the vocals, I use male narrator, whether it's females or males, because it puts a little bit of bass on it and sounds better. And that's it. That's it. I make all my music and all my stuff. I have all that stuff locked and loaded beforehand. So after we record, I just pop it all on. And like I said, it's pretty quick now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I made like a couple of training videos for my people, and now I've got it. So most of my people edit their own shows, and the ones that don't, I'm just like, okay, we'll get you there. You know, this is all about learning and doing what you can with your hobby, and yeah.
Going forth.
Yeah.
So I'll have one last question for you, and then I'll let you get back to it. How do you go about finding the podcast for your network? Do you go find them and source them yourself? Do they come to you?
That's a good question.
Friends projects that you take on?
I'm going to just say all of the above. So when we started 5 years ago, my wife and I had just finished. I'm going to hit stop broadcast because nobody needs to hear me